Lo and behold, a game review. It took me long enough. Sorry about that, everyone. I don't have a huge amount of time lately, or at least recently, and playing games does take quite a bit of it, and I don't really like to review games that I haven't beaten thoroughly, or at least gotten tired of, because they're not that great, or no extra content, or so on and so on. Regardless, here is my first review of the game Condemned 2 Bloodshot for the PlayStation 3. This is a survival horror game. The plot basically revolves around Ethan Thomas, who is a cop who is kind of haunted by hallucinations and not drug addict, alcoholic, after his confrontation with serial killer X in the previous game. And don't worry if you haven't played the first one; it's really not that hard to catch up. Basically, he got his finger cut off by SKX in the previous game, and he was a serial killer. That's all you really need to know. Having said that, I don't really want to discuss the story too in-depth for lack of spoilers, though this did come out a little while back. But regardless, it has dropped in price, a good time to pick it up. But I will say the story... I'm tempted to say I like the story, but at the same time, the presentation of it is so poor at times. I mean, it starts out really good. Not amazing, not like Oscar caliber, of course it won't be Oscar because it's a game, but you know what I mean. But it's got a really good horror catch to it. It reminds me of this movie, The Signal, if you've ever seen that. If you haven't, go see it. It's a good horror movie. But I thought it was a neat concept. You have hallucinations kind of popping up at you because of your alcohol. And then it is later, or quite soon in actually, revealed there is something else, more supernatural behind all of this. And, well, if you've ever played Indigo Prophecy, where the story kind of goes all crazy near the last third of it, But the same thing here, and I will say the story, it kind of collapses. I lost track of it a couple times, not because it was that complicated, but just because it was so poorly told. And the fact this game has some serious audio clipping issues, but it's not a great story, but it's a serviceable story. You do play games for the gameplay, and, you know, the game holds up in that regard. So the story, not bad. Gameplay, moving on to it, the game basically is a first-person fighting game with some guns in it, first-person combat. But it's really interesting. I gotta say, I've never played another game like it. It's very baffling at first. Getting the timing down for blocking is sometimes problematic. Basically, in that you have to control each of your arms. So R1 would be your right arm, and L1 would be your left arm. And it's an interesting concept with the two-handed thing. You only have to use R1 because you swing it. The game basically revolves around you investigating a string of murders that are going on, and it really increases the tension. If this were just a straight run-and-gun game, it would not work, I don't think. I think it'd be okay. But it really drags you into some of the creepiness of it. Because you're going in, you have to get close to every single enemy. You have to check every corner, because the only way you can fight back is by getting in close. So basically the entire game involves you going around investigating different parts of the city, and eventually the conspiracy, by picking up things around the environment. Flashlights, pipes, wires, mannequin arms, whatever you can find to bludgeon your opponent with. And you know what? The combat is quite satisfying. It gets a little repetitive. The game... even though it is a fairly short game, it does tend to even wear on you near the three-quarter point, because you've gotten used to by then. There's no real twists, ever. But, it's not bad. There is something later in the game I'm not going to spoil, but it is kind of an ability, related to the conspiracy, and though it does stem from the rather broken, fragmented storyline, it would have been interesting to explore more. I think it could have been used a lot better in a lot more circumstances. Maybe in the next game. Who knows? I don't know how well this game sold. I would not think amazingly well, but you never know. Regardless, the game does break it up in a few segments, with a few running segments and a few puzzles with varying quality. The running segments are okay, though very hit and miss. More trial and error, I mean. And the puzzle segments are just plain goddamn annoying. You can never really tell what exactly you're supposed to do and what it is, most of the time being constantly attacked while trying to figure it out. So it's just a pain in the ass. I really wish they would have taken them out altogether. The one big deviation that's worth noting is big good portion of the game is crime scene investigations. Played exactly the way you'd think they would be. You get a camera and you have a UV light, and you try and figure out what happened. The game mostly points out clues to you if you highlight them, but some of them can be extremely tricky, and it's not nearly as easy as you think. In fact, well, maybe I just suck, but I could not get a lot of these things without actually just giving in and saying, "Hey, is this right?" Because you don't actually fail missions. You don't have to complete them. You can just say random things, and then they'll rate you. But the big thing is, if you do well on these, this is how you get upgrades, such as soundless boots, brass knuckles, of the like. The upgrades actually add something to the game, to be honest. I do really feel like they're good upgrades. But regardless, back to the crime scene investigation parts, they're not bad. Some of them tend to drag on a little long, because you bring up kind of like a video screen on them to contact back with your office about them, and it goes on along the lines of the codec conversations in Metal Gear, where it's just talking heads. But like I said, the story is kind of interesting for the large portions when you're actually doing these crime scene investigations. And it's a worthy addition. It's a really neat concept. I like it. I like how they included it. And it is something that should be worth noted. This game does, and I don't think I've seen another game. I realize it kind of does harken back to point-and-click adventures, but blending of the two genres is more what I'm referring to. So overall, the gameplay is entertaining, actually. I quite enjoyed it. I would actually buy another game just to play more of this. It does grow repetitive, but I think it ended within reason. So I think it's worth a shot, this-wise, and I think you'll have a lot of fun with it. Moving on to the graphics, I will say I quite like the graphics. They weren't great. The character models could use a lot of work, particularly the males. They look hilariously blocky and their upper torso is just way too huge. But they do their job, and I will say, though there is some simplicity in the environments, most of the time it is quite dark, so you don't notice it, which I think is intentional, to be honest, but it works well regardless. For certain things, there are some very good graphics. I like the oil enemies. If you play the game, you know what I mean. If not, go play it. Fire effects are also quite good. Water effects are good in this game. You say you can judge a game by its water effects, and this game's water effects are good. And all the particle effects are generally great in this game. There is some slowdown. There is a lot of loading in between levels. And if anything, I will say, perhaps they are sometimes oversimplistic. When you're in brightly lit areas, they really don't look good at all. There's a cabin level later on in the game where you're in virtually light all the time, and it just doesn't work. Digressing slightly while I'm remembering this, I do say this game is a first-person combat game, but there is guns, and that cabin level in particular forces you to use solely guns, and frankly, the gun control in this game does not hold up. So that's not a plus when it forces you to do that near the end of the game. But anyway, getting back to this. The graphics are good, not anything great, but like you wouldn't show this off to someone and say, "Hey, these are incredible graphics," but they do the job. They do look next-gen. You're not going to feel embarrassed to play it in front of someone. Sound-wise, this game doesn't really have a huge amount of music because it's largely ambient sounds that works to its effects. It's a horror game. But for what it does have, it's good. I will say, like I mentioned earlier in this review, there is some massive sound problems in this game where the game's effects, regardless if you go into the options and adjust the scales, are always much louder than the voices, and in-game dialogue can sometimes be impossible to hear. And I'm sure I wasn't missing out on anything amazing because the story isn't all that amazing, but regardless, it would have been nice in that to adjust that somewhat. Lastly, I just wanted to say that this is solely a single-player game. There is some online multiplayer, but there are very few people playing it right now, and frankly, for good reason. The first-person combat engine does not work well in multiplayer combat. Frankly, the main game has this problem too, where the engine was not built to take on a lot of enemies at once, and that does happen in multiplayer. But regardless, it is worth your time. It's not too pricey anymore, next-gen standards. It's about $46 after tax with PS3. It's $39.99. It's not bad at all. And you know, you'll probably get your money's worth. If you like horror games, if you really like the concept, the demo is up on PSN. I'm sure it's up on the Xbox Live Marketplace too. Just check it out, see if you like it. It's not a terrible game. It does have its problems. The gameplay is somewhat flawed. The graphics, not amazing. Sound, okay. The controls do feel very natural, though. And there's a decent amount of content here if you want to go back. There's unlockables, 4-set multiplayer. And, as well, there are some extra modes you unlock at the beginning of the game. It's not bad. Check it out. Condemned 2, Bloodshot.